video, we're going to go ahead and go over just the basics of the workflow that I'm using, how each of these nodes works together, and we're going to start creating some renders using all of our inputs that we've created. So now we've opened ComfyUI, and this is like the default layout that you'll get when you start ComfyUI. You'll have the checkpoint, the positive and negative prompt, the latent image, the K-sampler, VAE, and then the save image over here. For our project, we're going to be using a more advanced workflow. It's going to have quite a few components. It might look a bit overwhelming, but foundationally, it still uses a lot of the same elements that we see here. It's just a lot more nodes, getting them to behave differently. So I'm going to go ahead and load up this workflow. Workflows are saved as JSON files that you can just drop right into the browser window, and it'll pull up the new workflow. A lot of these at first might all pop up red, and what you'll have to do is you'll have to utilize the manager to install the nodes one by one. But for now, let's get into the different nodes and what they do. So over here we have our Animate diff loader, and what this does is it loads the Animate diff model, which is our motion model that we use for the animating. And for this, I'm going to be using the V3 model. It's the latest model, I believe. Just the standard V3 model for Stable Diffusion 1.5. For the context options, I leave these alone. I keep the loop on so that I get a looping animation, and then I usually set the value of the overlap to 5. Between 4 and 5 is good. The higher up you go, the more morphy and kind of gooey the animation is, and then if you start going below 4, it'll be a bit more choppy. So I found 5 to be a nice way to go. Now we have our VAE encoder. I just use the standard encoder that works well for SD 1.5, and then up here I have an area that I can mix two models together based on the model and clip merge values. I'm starting with the Dream Shaper model. It's a model that I use a lot. It also has license appropriate for what I'm doing right now. And yeah, so I have this set up just in case I want to mix it with another model as well. The top model is a value of 1 on the model merge and clip merge, and then model 2 would be a value of 0 on those. So 0.5 on model merge and clip merge would be a even split between those two models. Then I have my clip set here. I have it at clip skip 2. Most models work with clip skip 2, or they might suggest clip skip 1 or no clip skip. Depending on the model you're using, just check out the page of the developers and see what they recommend. Now over here we have our positive and negative prompt, and then below that we have our unclip conditioning, which is the strength of our prompt, and then our IP adapter weight, which is the strength of our image batch. So that brings us over here to the IP adapter. So this is where I put in my image folder. So I have that here, and what I do is I will go over to the V1 folder, grab the path here, copy that, and then paste it here, and then make sure my image load cap has 27, because there's 27 images in there, and that should be set. So then I have my clip vision set up here. I have these nodes set up to enhance the image inputs. So this allows the clip vision to see the images better, which gives the model a better understanding of all the details in there. I'm using a plus high strength model because I really want the images to shine through and get a lot of their value input in the process. If I was relying more on my prompt, I might do the standard strength so that the images don't have as much of a stylistic influence. But for now, plus works for what we want. So now we're moving down to the video loader. So what I'll do here is I will actually set up our video loader node. So if I type in upload, load video, there we go. So this is part of the video helper suite. It's a great node. Again, you can download all of these node packs from the manager very easily. There are also instructions to install the manager on GitHub. So what I'll do is I'll wire this into our color correct here. And there's a few settings that I'll want to adjust here. So I'll change the rate to 12 frames per second. The reason why I'm doing this is when you're rendering using Animate diff, there's a certain breathing pace to the model. So 12, between 8 and 12, you'll have like a nice natural rhythm to things. If you went higher than that, like say if you're doing like 24 frames per second and you want to animate someone walking, they're going to be walking way too fast, or your animation over someone walking is going to be flickering a lot. So 12 kind of allows a smoother pace, especially with the animation like this, where I want things to kind of flow gently and easily. Force rate of 12 will give us that effect. And our frame load cap here, so that's the number of frames to load. I'm going to start with 40 right now, just so we can do some tests and I can get familiar with how this video is going to work and respond to my prompt and image inputs. And then right here I have the color correct setup. This is kind of like your mini Photoshop built into ComfyUI. It's pretty cool. So with this Art Venture node, you can change the temperature, the hue, the brightness, contrast, saturation, gamma of your input image. Again, you can do this all with the manager in ComfyUI. You can find these nodes that you don't have and install them. So now below this color correct, we have a preview image here. This will be a place where we can look at those changes that we made to the video frame by frame and make sure it's what we're going for. So we get a little preview here to see like the color change or the brightness change. Whatever change we make, we'll be able to see that and get an idea of it before we go through the rest of the process. So I can go ahead here and change the hue. We'll do 145 for now. And let's go ahead and cue the prompt so that we can see that change. So we see it go into our video loader, then goes into the color correct, and then we get the preview, and that is beautiful. I actually think I love this much more than the gold and blue. This nice pink and teal red, this bronze. I think that actually might work really well. So yeah, happy accident. I think we'll stick with this for the render and see how it goes. All right, so moving on over to these. So these are the control nets. So I have two control nets set up here. One of them is a canny control net. So that's a model that's dedicated to capturing the line art. So the lines, the outlines of whatever the video input is. And then this other control net is for the depth. So this control net will actually create a depth map of the video input. And these both work together with the positive and negative prompt and our image inputs. And all of that kind of routes through right into our K sampler, which is kind of where all of the action is. The K sampler is where you'll see the animation start to take form. So I have a seed here, and the seed is essentially a random number. It's infinite. You click a new fixed random, and for each of those seeds, there is a new animation, essentially. So while our video input is the same and our image input is the same and our prompts are the same, the way that the software works, the way that these models work, is they pick a random starting point to apply all that information. And this is where you choose that starting point. So each time you randomize the seed, it's a new starting point. It's going to end up with a different result. So we'll go over to our negative prompt here. There's a few things that I like to type in right off the bat that kind of help, especially with the Dream Shaper model. So I'll add a few of those tokens here. The first is this low quality, worst quality. So parentheses and double parentheses add emphasis to the token. So it's like multiplying the influence that those tokens have in the whole prompt. So this ensures that the model is going to be paying a special attention to making sure that something low quality, worse quality is not a part of the output since it's in the negative prompt. And then a numerical value as well. This just makes it easier to adjust the strength of it. So if I do, 1.1 here to 1.5, the higher you go, the more unstable things can get. So it's good to have this number value here because it makes it another parameter that you can kind of adjust. So beyond that, there's a couple more tokens that I'll want to throw in here, particularly around people and human forms. A lot of these models are trained with a lot of data on, people. So portraits, female anatomy, these are very heavy subjects for models to be trained on, and Dream Shaper is heavily trained on those. So a few tokens that help me to put in the negative prompt are those things that I kind of want to avoid. So human, person, people, humanoid, just anything that describes human form, because I really want to focus on like more of these objects and these sculptural forms. I can have a little human bleeding in there, but for the most part, if we do want something representing a human face, we want it to be sculptural. We want it to be artsy. We don't want an actual person's face or person's body parts to kind of pop up in our animation. Now we'll pop up to our positive prompt and we'll just put some things in our pretext here, which will be like our foundational prompt. So put in antiques, trinkets, do some abstract forms. And we'll go over down to our video loader here. We've got that set at a frame cap of 40, so we're just going to capture the first 40 frames of the video. We got a random seed here. As for the sampler, steps starting at 16 is pretty good. I can go as high as 32, sometimes 40, just depending. The amount of steps will take longer, but it's just the number of passes that your render has. So less steps means a less detailed render. But after a certain point, it doesn't make things much better. Then the CFG will start at 7. Usually you start at like 6 to 8, and then as you work up, the CFG value makes things more richer, more saturated, but can also cause what's called CFG burn. If it's too high, it can also become very unstable. So starting low and then raising it as you need to is the best practice. For the sampler, DPM PP2M has always been the best option for me. It works great for raw generation, it works great for vid to vid, and with the Keras scheduler. I have not really worked with a combination that works as well as this, so I highly recommend keeping these sampler settings, especially the sampler name and scheduler, as they are, because that will generally give you the best results, and that's from my experience. So we've queued the prompt, and now we can kind of see the flow of information. So starting down here from the video loader, we can see that the candy edge already did its pass. Now we're in the depth map. So right now it's processing the video and creating a depth map of those frames. And we see over here, we've got our preview of the 40 frames with the new coloring from the hue adjustment. So now we're loading our image batch. It's going to move on to load our clip vision model, our clip vision encode. Now it's running our positive prompt information. Now it's finishing up loading up the IP adapter. So now the clip vision enhancer is running. This is going to help us get a better look at our images, get more information from them. And now we can see that our K-sampler is running. So what's really cool about ComfyUI is this green box highlights whatever node is active. So you can really follow the path of the process as well. And with the K-sampler efficient from the efficiency nodes pack, you also get this little preview window that you can monitor and see your first frame of your video kind of coming to life. All right, so now that the rendering process is done, it will combine the frames into our video. So now we are looking at the first 40 frames of our animation rendered through ComfyUI. And I can bring over our input video node as well so we can kind of see the comparison of the change here. So we'll put that back over there. And now we really want to transform this output into something completely different. So right now it's kind of just going off our base prompt of the antiques and the trinkets and using our image inputs to kind of decide how to paint over our input video. So what I want to do is I want to kind of create this narrative here. So I'm going to use the prompt schedule. So this kind of works like keyframes. So you select a frame number here, and then you can type in whatever prompt, whatever you want to happen at frame 0, at the start of the video. So I was seeing some cool bird sculptures while I was there. So I want to go for a tropical bird in the jungle. And I'm going to see what happens when I just have this as my starting prompt for the beginning of the video. So I'll choose a new random seed here. I like to click it a couple times. And we'll go ahead and cue the prompt. So now the only thing that should really light up is the batch prompt schedule node, because we haven't changed anything else at the start of the pipeline. So something kind of cool about ComfyUI is it only starts back up from the last change that you made. So if you change the seed, generally just the K-sample would start. If you change the prompt at all, it would just be the prompt box. So we have the prompt box lighting up because that's where we made our change. So all the images are still already loaded. Our input video has already been processed still. So it's keeping all that information and just adding the new prompt information and the new seed to create a new animation for us. So now our K-sampler is lit up again, which means our next test render is taking place. So once the render's done, should export our frames and put them together. And now see how much that changed everything. So now these abstract forms have kind of become these abstract tropical birds, right? And that's just from one keyframe prompt. And this is what I really love about creating in this way is you are constantly exploring and trying new things. And the way I've always loved to create has been very experimental. So being able to kind of dive into these different worlds and transform them with ideas so quickly like this is really special for me, and it feels very almost like an adventure every time I think of a new idea, or I make a change to the colors, or even just picking a new seed, which I did just now. You'll see it's going to be a completely different experience. So now here we see all the context is still the same, but again, it's another iteration on the idea. The concept is all still there, the same image inputs, the same video input, the same prompt. However, we have different imagery taking place over these forms. So this is another part in the process where we can start getting super creative and exploring, and this is probably my favorite part of the entire process, which is just discovering what happens when I type in certain things, when I change the colors, and so on. So I'm going to go back to our batch prompt here, and in our base prompt, I'm going to add lusterware. So this is a new term I learned while I was actually at the antique store. So lusterware kind of describes porcelain sculptures and pottery that kind of has this hand-painted and iridescent look. So I'm going to add that to the prompt. I'm also going to add sculpture in here. I want to really double down on these terms so that what we're seeing, isn't so feathery and lifelike and more represents our data set and what we're going for. I'm also going to adjust the max frames here because we don't need 1,000 frames processed right now by our batch. We just do a cap of 100 for now, just so we're not overdoing the batch. It's just going to save us some time. So now we'll go ahead and get a new fixed random seed, and we'll queue our prompt with our updated language. So now immediately we're seeing more glossy forms. We're getting some of that lusterware look. So now I'm going to go back up here, and I'm actually going to pull lusterware out of my base prompt and move it into my batch prompt because I don't want everything to look like lusterware. I just want this first part to look like lusterware. I'll keep the parentheses around it for the emphasis. And then what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to change our frame load cap to 80. So we'll go to 80 frames now. So we want to keep this same format. So I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this line. So we'll go ahead and add a comma here. It's important to separate these lines with commas, but the last one should not have a comma. Then we'll do 40, frame 40 here, and let's add a new prompt here. So we'll go ahead and open up my data set and just take a look at the images, see if anything stands out, something that might spark some new ideas. So I'm actually liking this form here. Just these kind of cups and bottles remind me a little bit of like a tower. So maybe I could do something like a castle. Right, so we'll go back over to our prompt here. And let's do a kingdom in the clouds. Maybe we can bring in another element in this keyframe. There's some fabric going on in some of these, so maybe I'll add some cloth fabric. That kind of nods back to our input video as well, so we can see how that works. So we'll get another random seed going here. Do a new prompt. So now we have a transition happening between two prompts. We have the prompt with the birds and the prompt with the cloth and the cloud kingdom. So I don't think we really got what we wanted. We are working with pretty small increments of frames right now. That could be one of the reasons we might not have the CFG as high. So what we'll go ahead and do down here is we're going to give a little bit more space for everything to render. So let's go for 120 frames as our load cap. And then we need to make sure we do the same on the batch prompt as well. So that should be good. I'm going to also bump up the CFG a little bit here. That might make our prompt come through with a little more strength as well. Go ahead and get a new random seed here, and we'll queue our prompt. So now in this input, it looks like I'm seeing some clouds. So the clouds, the fabric's definitely coming through. So it is recognizing our keyframe prompt a bit more, which is great. That's exactly what we wanted. So now we're kind of on this journey of walking this line between the input and the prompt and the settings and parameters for the models to kind of find this in between of our concepts and ideas, so we can have this abstract kind of narrative going on. So now we can get into the power of prompting in this process. So I'm going to make a really strong prompt here, completely out of left field. I'm going to go biomechanical cyberpunk. I'm going to do the double parentheses around it so you can see how much you can stray from your original idea, even if the image inputs aren't anything, mechanical or cyberpunk. When you combine those words with the inputs, you can get some really cool results. So now I'll render with a new seed, and we'll see how much that changes our output. Now already just from our preview window, we can tell this is looking very different. All right, now we can see our output has changed a lot. We still have some clouds in there, but everything else has gone completely cyberpunk. It is not really related to antiques, but it is grabbing some of those textures from our input. So with a really strong prompt like this, our inputs become almost secondary. And what I'm working with right now without doing anything cyberpunk and crazy is I'm kind of seeing how I can blend the prompt and the input to be in the same realm. But you can obviously go completely off the rails and do very contradicting prompts and imagery to explore and create a bunch of crazy new things, which I think is some of the most fun you can have with this kind of software. So now I'm going to my history tab, and I'm just going to go back to where we were. I don't really want to do anything cyberpunk with this. I want to stick to this cozy, curious, antique vibe that we have going. So now that I've gone over the kind of process and the steps that I take to create the animation and get this story narrative started, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here. So this is after playing with my keyframe prompts a little bit for a few hours, and I've gotten kind of further along in my concept, and I'm just going to go ahead and do a quick 40 frame seed so that we can get into the two kind of upscaling methods that I have. So I have a new seed rendered out here, and we're going to use this as a reference to kind of compare the different upscale options that we have. So I've gone ahead and duplicated the window here, and I'm just going to pull up this preview, and we'll be able to compare the upscales up there. So the first option we have here is the high-res fix script. So what this does is it re-noises the render and then paints in more details. So it's like taking your render, making it fuzzy and bigger, and then filling in that fuzz with new details. So I have this set right now to upscale by a multiplier of 2. So that means that my new render will be 2 times the size it was before. If you have a smaller video card, maybe a 2070 or a 3060, you might want to stick to 1.25 or maybe 1.45 just to ensure you're not running out of memory, depending on how long your render is. I'm using a 4090 mobile for this, so I'm going to keep my upscale at a multiplier of 2. As for the number of high-res steps, this is usually pretty good between 16 to 24, I'd say would be the max I might use. Also, the denoise value, really high denoise value like 0.75 will change your generation quite a bit, whereas a lower denoise value, you can go usually as low as like zero point 0.4 something, and that will be much closer to your original render. I like to do between 0.56 to 0.75, depending on how attached I am to my initial render. And you can always redo the upscale on the same seed with different settings until you're happy with the output you're getting. So I'm going to keep the seed the same so we can compare the upscale to the original, and you can see that difference. So now we have our upscaled render, so we can go ahead and grab this and compare it to the original render up here. We can right click on the video and sync the previews so that we can see the changes and they play at the same time. And you can tell that there are some new shapes and textures and just overall details that have been added. I'll make this window a bit bigger as well. And we can see too that the resolution also has been increased. So on our original render here on the left, you can see it's a little splotch here, a little sketch here, and then over here, these details have been a bit more refined. And with the high-res fix upscaler, it kind of does tend to add more pieces and parts to the elements. And for some renders and some concepts, this might not be what we want. So I do have another upscaling technique down here as well. So this is the line art upscaler. Now what this upscaler does is it uses a line art control net to, kind of like we did in the beginning with the video input, it grabs all the line work, all those lines, and it kind of uses those as a guide for the areas to paint into. So let's go ahead and bypass our upscaler, our other upscaler up here, and then we can get into these settings here. So I have my multiplier set at 2, and then everything else I leave alone with this. These have been the best settings that have worked for me. The only thing I really change is the upscale latent by, so how high I'm upscaling, and usually my limit is 2 for that. Anything higher than that I'll bring into a third-party program to upscale further. So we'll go ahead and we'll cue the prompt with our line art upscaler unbypassed. And we can see the control net working. And then that information goes into our K-sampler specifically for the line art upscale. And we'll have our upscaled render in the video combine below that. All right, now we have our upscaled output using the line art. And we will go ahead and add this up here as well so we can compare all 3 of them together. Go ahead and sync the previews, and now they're all synced up. So you can see when you're using the high res fix, you'll kind of have more details painted in. It's kind of multiplying the details. Whereas with the line art upscale, it's refining these different sections based on the line art, the line work of the piece, which can sometimes create like a bit of a more flat, a more simplistic output, which again might not be completely preferred, especially if you're going for realism. So it really depends on what your concept is and if you want something to seem more animated, a little bit more minimal, or if you want something to seem more photorealistic or have a lot of textures. So both these upscale methods can be used individually, they can be used together, they can be stacked. So it's a different case for every piece that you create. So we'll go ahead and close out of these for now, and we'll stick to the output that we got from our line art, and we'll go into the next part of the process here. So I'm going to grab this image output from our line art K-sampler and attach it to our image resize node here. And now we can update the image resize node to have the parameters of what we want for our final output size. So this was originally configured for landscape, but we're going to switch that to be portrait size. So we'll do 1350 for the height and 1080 for the width. Now, this section of the workflow utilizes what's called an LCM model. So it's a latent consistency model. A lot of people like to work with LCM rather than the Keras samplers that I use. But I feel like the LCM is a bit soft and a bit dull, and it should be utilized for something like, dance videos, painting over something like that. And that's actually what I use it for in this module. I use it as another way to paint and kind of denoise everything and then reshape it. And by doing this with these specific settings and this specific control net setup, I'm able to retain the composition and the look of whatever upscale process I just did and adjust the size and just clean up some of the geometry and textures to be a bit more refined. I don't necessarily always use this part of the workflow. Sometimes I find that what I have from the upscale is enough to then bring into a third-party program and upscale further. But other times things are still a bit messy because I wasn't able to take my parameters as high as I normally would like to without instability. So this comes in handy as a kind of last final step polish on the whole process to get a finished product when I'm kind of struggling to get really clean details out of the upscale process. And then lastly here, this is a Rife VFI, so this is our interpolator. So what this will do is this can multiply our frame rate by creating in between frames for our render. So if I have my current render at 12 frames per second, I can multiply that to be 24 frames per second by doing my frame multiplier and then updating the frame rate here to be 24 instead of 12. And that's another part of this that you could do before using the LCM refiner or separately. So now I'm just going to go ahead and cue the prompt and we'll have it run through this part of the workflow. So now our render is super smooth. We've interpolated all of our frames. We've cleaned up those shapes, that geometry, and those details to be a lot smoother. LCM does kind of have this softening effect, so you can play a little bit with the control net settings in this part of the workflow to see what works for you, or bypass it altogether. I may not even use LCM for this particular workflow because I'm getting some really good results just from the first upscaling option, and I might be able to take that all the way. But just for reference here in comparison, we can see the difference, how cleaned up it gets, and of course the interpolation that takes place, creating a much smoother animation. So now that we've gone through all the steps of how I create the animation, I'm going to revisit my batch prompt schedule, and I'm going to run lots and lots of renders with lots of different ideas and adjust settings. So we're going to jump to my final render, and I'll go back through and we can look at all of the various changes that I made through this process and how I got to my final output. All right, so I'm pretty happy with my prompt and the way the video is going right now, so we can go ahead and look into that over here. As you can see, I have 720 frames rendered out now. So I just wanted to get a little bit creative with my prompt. I ended up saving the birds for later. I found flowers to be working better for this first section of the video. So I have some blooming porcelain flowers. And I kind of wanted to play around, so I wanted to see what happened if I added terms like mecha, just to see, wooden texture, cactus sculpture. I wanted to just kind of blend in ideas from my imagination that I was getting when I was looking through the image data. And when you're working on something more abstract like this, you're not really trying to completely overpower the forms. You're almost kind of just subtly hinting at imagery to create what I call like a pocket-sized narrative, right? You're not actually seeing blooming flowers in a meadow. You're not actually seeing a mecha. We might actually see a painted cat sculpture though in this instance. So it's playing around with how much we can bend the concepts. And then in the prompt box below that, these are some tokens that just help me to control the detail I was seeing, the level of the structures. I wanted some more cute and vibrant colors, a little bit more playful, and then I also wanted to like get the feeling of really being up close to these objects. Now, when I was doing some of the upscaling process, I had some hands and fingers coming in, and I also didn't want anything looking scary or menacing, so I added some additional stuff here. A fish, for instance, I kept on seeing a fish popping up, and I kind of want to avoid that. And then also just to complement the close-up, I had the far away and the negative prompt. And now here I have something called an embedding. So embeddings are these additional models that are activated by certain keywords in your prompts. So this one is called boring, and I really like this one. It's a negative embedding that just adds a little extra pizzazz to things. And since I wanted to have a little bit more pop going on, and a little bit more nuance, I thought it would be a good fit, and it did kind of produce a little bit more stylized output. So negative embeddings and positive embeddings are really great tools, especially if you're trying to nail down a specific concept. They're available on Civit AI, among other places. If you just look around for embeddings, they come in handy in a lot of different ways, and I love this one. So now down here, my prompt weight and my IP adapter weight are not quite equaling one. I really wanted the images to stay strong, so I kept that at 0.45. And then I boosted the prompt weight a bit so I could get a little bit more of these forms coming in, so that I had a little bit more control over the narrative. Now, what I did is I ran a lot of different seeds. So I have my high res fix that I'm using, and I've set this at 1.5 because 2 was creating a little bit too much. It was kind of like fractalating the forms and just painting in a little bit too much like new objects, and it kind of started to be more like artifacts, not really complementing the theme that I was going for. So I limited it a little bit just to 1.5. And then I ran a bunch of different seeds, and I actually ran these while changing the hue each time in the color correct over here. So each seed also had a different color variation, and this just gives me more variety when I'm searching so that I can really explore, and when I come back and sit down, I can get lots of different options to work with. So now I'm pretty happy with all of my outputs. I think that the high-res fix worked great. I think using the LCM refiner might be a little too much smoothing for this. We're getting some really nice details, very sculptural textures, and I want to keep that. I don't really want to mess with that any further. So I'm going to take these outputs and I'm going to put them through my third-party upscaler and interpolator that I like to use called Topaz. It's really fantastic. I usually prefer it over the Rife VFI that's already in Comfy just because I can do the 3x slow-mo interpolation and then speed that up later. So I highly recommend it. Rife VFI is super great if you don't want to get a Topaz subscription. You can obviously unbypass the Rife and run that through. You could even add this node after the K sampler within here without even needing to use the LCM refiner as well. Um, so yeah, so we have our final render here. And in the next video, we'll be creating some sound for that in Ableton and then bringing it into After Effects for some post-processing. So we'll see you over there.